And what would you like people to know about you?
I'm a fun guy. Obviously, I love the game of basketball. I mean, it's just more questions you have to ask me in order for me to tell you about myself. I just can't give you a whole spiel. I don't even know where you're sitting at.
Kawhi Leonard is a fascinating character, and this awkward moment probably should have never happened in the first place. The Claw's role in NBA history is woefully undefined. While he has multiple championships, multiple Finals MVPs, and multiple Defensive Player of the Year awards, Leonard has made his mark through extremely unprecedented, unorthodox means. He has one of the most confusing, polarizing legacies of all time, but the one thing that we can all agree on is that he'll be the most remembered for his unlikely, nearly unbelievable title run in 2019.
Feels amazing. It's great. I love it. You gotta enjoy it.
Kawhi led the Toronto Raptors on a legendary championship campaign. So legendary that people started suggesting he might be the best player on Earth. He even started getting compared to the one and only Michael Jeffrey Jordan.
Who was Michael Jordan? And he was a guy who dominated a one-on-one matchup on both ends of the floor with his physicality and his mental prowess. And when you watch Kawhi sort of hold the ball in a slow it down half court, it is very reminiscent in that respect.
Following this instant classic playoff performance, rather than stay with his championship squad and run it back like you'd ordinarily suspect, Kawhi Leonard would instead continue to defy tradition, and in the process, possibly make one of the worst decisions by any professional athlete this millennia, right up there with Dennis Schroeder turning down $86 million and LeBron saying, "Ain't no party like a Diddy party" on a live stream. But that's a story for another day. Part 2 even. For now, let's take a deep dive into the most unlikely championship run in NBA history. This is part 1 of a larger look at Kawhi Leonard. Part 2 will be our next video discussing Kawhi's time with the Clippers, and then there will be a supercut with added details, especially about his Spurs era. To be completely honest, we bit off a little bit more than we could chew, because man, this guy's career is just a never-ending, insane story through and through, which is wild for such a seemingly mild-mannered guy. This part is dedicated to his Raptors run, but let's quickly catch up on how Kawhi even ended up there in the first place. If you're really eager for a more in-depth look at these years, check out my Two Faces of Greg Popovich video. But without further ado, thank you to the sponsor of this video, Fabletics. With winter finally here, it's time to bundle up and give yourself or your loved ones the gift of cozy premium clothing at a value that can't be beat. We love Fabletics so much because their VIP membership is such an obvious W, but in case you don't already know, wearing Fabletics means feeling the comfort and support that comes with long-lasting, well-fitting clothes. Their moisture-wicking anti-odor and 4-way stretch technologies keep me feeling fresh, plus their monthly drops keep my closet stocked with stylish, functional fits from casual to active wear. As a VIP, you can use your member credit to redeem a 2-piece set or any product up to $100 every single month. And when you use my link fabletics.com/rusty, then you get awesome offers that are just for new VIPs, like 80% off of your first purchase, including Fabletics' all-new hoodies and joggers and even updated classics. But let's say you want to skip a month. Well, you can do so as often as you like and you will not be charged. Just skip between the 1st and the 5th of the month, and even when you do skip, you're still a VIP, and keep access to VIP exclusives like up to 50% off of all products, all day, every day, early access to styles and exclusive sales, and free access to the Fabletics Fit app, a $15 a month value. If that sounds like it's for you, then go to fabletics.com/rusty to tap in, become a VIP, and get some of the best clothes for the holiday season and 80% off of your first purchase. Check out the link in the description or go to fabletics.com/rusty. Again, that is fabletics.com/rusty, and thank you to Fabletics for sponsoring this video.
Reporting Leonard has grown so frustrated with how the Spurs handled his injury this past season, he has decided to seek his walking papers. Now, Leonard, according to Hanes sources, feels the franchise turned on him.
Kawhi was tired of the way the Spurs were treating him, but that was really only the straw that broke the camel's back, because Kawhi was already growing in ambition. Ambition that San Antonio just couldn't accommodate. Ambition to be one of the league's premier superstars, one in a big market, and one preferably back home in California. After asking out, Kawhi made it very clear where he wanted to be, and he had quite a bit of leverage to get there. Off of his injury and on a one-year contract, there was a whole lot of risk in trading for him. Add on to it him saying that he wanted to play in LA and LA only. Well, at that point, it turns trading for him into a desperation move for any other team. So now, I guess we just sit back and see who has the better package between the Lakers and Clippers and pick up the story from there. Yeah, I'm just kidding. He got extradited to Canada.
The deal is final. The Spurs will send Kawhi Leonard and Danny Green to the Raptors for DeMar DeRozan, Jakob Poeltl, and a 2019 first-round pick. League sources tell me the Raptors and Spurs are getting on a trade call with the league office momentarily to finalize the deal.
So how exactly did Toronto find themselves in this position? Let's rewind a bit.
Lowry up at the rim.
Actually, just real quick, let's go even further back.
This the finale on the first round for Vince Carter.
Oh, it's over! It's over, ladies and gentlemen!
Okay, I can see how you thought that's what I meant, but no, I mean like really, really far back. November 1st, 1946, just over a year after the end of World War II, the NBA's very first game, the inception of one of America's most major pro sports leagues, was played in Toronto. Yeah, the NBA, originally called the BAA at the time, actually started with the Toronto Huskies. They played the New York Knicks and took a 2-point loss, 68-66. This would become all too familiar for the Huskies, as they would go on to finish their first and final season with a record of 22-38 before being dissolved. This small place in NBA history from Toronto would remain nothing more than obscure trivia for nearly a half-century, until in 1995 the NBA expanded to 29 total teams, adding 2 Canadian franchises, the Vancouver Grizzlies and the Toronto Raptors.
They lived over 85 million years ago, but they're coming back to play a little hoop.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Raptors are born.
Naturally, as expansion teams, the Grizzlies and Raptors were both awful for a while, and they were not very successful franchises financially as a result. Canada didn't have quite the basketball culture of America where the game originated, and after a few seasons, it looked like the NBA expanding to Canada might have been a mistake. That was before he arrived.
Carter with his first shot. First round for Vince Carter.
Oh, it's over! It's over!
Gonna get a shot off. He does. Got it! Vince Carter wins the game.
Great hands and strip. Ahead of the pack. Showtime. Oh, no! And misses a three. Carter with the rebound. Turnaround. Another one. That's a base. Chance runs into Theo. He throws it up in. And it's over the floor. Crossover.
sorry, did he just start screaming more onions?
The floor, crossover, onions, more onions.
Yeah, he did. Why? Vince Carter means more to the Toronto Raptors than any other individual does to most franchises. They might not even be in Toronto anymore had the human highlight reel not arrived. You know, the Grizzlies play in Memphis now for a reason. If you didn't know who Vince Carter was and I just gave you my loose explanation of his game, you would think I'm talking about Michael Jordan with a three-point shot. Well, on offense anyways. And as I say that, I can feel some of you rolling your eyes through the screen, and I know that comparison comes off as pretty hyperbolic, but I promise it's really only a very slight exaggeration. VC was not only a terrifying downhill threat, but he also had a really solid mid-range game. His percentages weren't off the charts by any means, but this was the dead ball era that we're talking about. He had a good handle, decent back to the basket game, and was a 40% three-point shooter on what, for his time, was a pretty damn high volume of threes. In fact, in 2001, he finished with 162 three-pointers made, which was 6th in the NBA, also finishing 6th in three-point percentage among players who hit at least 100 threes. Now, unfortunately, Vince wasn't able to take the Raptors to the promised land, as they pretty routinely failed to put a good roster around him, and even when they had good teammates for Vince, like his cousin Tracy McGrady, they'd end up leaving for a stateside team anyways. The furthest he got them was round 2 versus the Philadelphia 76ers in 2001. The series was extremely close the whole way through, as Vince and AI went bucket for bucket. Both averaged 30 plus, while their next highest scoring teammate averaged 16. Vince had a 50-point performance in a blowout victory in Game 3, where he had an NBA playoff record 8 threes in the first half, breaking the record that was previously established by the GOAT in the Shrug game. Meanwhile, Iverson had a couple of 50 pieces of his own, dropping 54 in Game 2 and 52 in a pivotal Game 5. There aren't many playoff series that you can say feature 3 different 50-point performances. This matchup would come down to the wire, going to a Game 7 in Philadelphia. Toronto found themselves down 6 with 3 minutes to go until Antonio Davis got a layup to drop, and then Del Curry hit a gutsy transition 3 with just under a minute left on the game clock, making it a 1-point game. After 2 missed jumpers from Philly in an attempt to extend the lead to 3, Toronto got a chance to win the game with 2 seconds on the clock. And who else would take that shot but Vince Sanity himself?
Carter trying to get free. Carter at the buzzer. No good. And the Sixers hold on and advance to the conference finals.
After getting a decent look, Vince narrowly missed a long 2 out of the corner that would have been the first Game 7 buzzer beater in NBA history. After falling just 1 point short of a conference finals appearance, where they would have met the Milwaukee Bucks in a series that they definitely could have won, Toronto wouldn't make the playoffs ever again in the Vince Carter era. And after a few years of failed season after failed season, Vince would ask out of Toronto and head to the New Jersey Nets, who had just made an NBA Finals appearance. This was a fairly ugly exit. It wasn't as normal as it is today for a guy like Vince to ask out of a bad situation in his prime. And with him being essentially the guy who put the Raps on the map, fans felt abandoned and angry as a result.
That's one of the things James does well. Carter. Wow. Just laid a Canadian brick. Vaughn, ball movement. Carter is booed. Wow. That's a second air ball.
In hindsight, 3 straight years with no playoff appearances and nothing resembling an all-star teammate made for a fairly reasonable basis for asking for a trade, which is part of why decades later, it seems as though that animosity has passed and Raptors fans are largely recognizing Carter for his impact on the franchise. In the years following his departure, Toronto didn't show many signs that things would change much. They drafted Chris Bosh at the end of Vince's tenure and even managed to make the playoffs a few times, but he ended up leaving as well, as he was more of a complimentary star miscast as a lead option. He would go on to win 2 titles with the Miami Heat. Now, funny enough, just like with Vince, Toronto's next star player was added at the tail end of Bosch's time there, as in 2009, the Raps drafted DeMar DeRozan with the 9th pick.
DeRozan throws down a nasty slam. DeRozan's fading. What a tough shot. And it goes. Has it stripped. Here's Lowry to the cutting. DeRozan spinning. And banks it in. DeRozan backs in. Falling away. Jumpers up and good. With 1.9 remaining.
DeMar DeRozan was an old-school bucket getter. The Compton native was either getting to the rim for the slam or killing the defense with the mid-range jumper, and there was nothing they could do about it. Whether or not that shot would go in had little to do with his defender's contest. Unfortunately, this left some room to be desired for his all-around game, especially his defense, as well as his lack of a three-point shot. But as far as franchise players go, you can absolutely do worse than D Rose. DeMar was alright in his rookie year, but would jump to 17 points per game in year 2 in a bigger role, and would remain around that average till 2013, where he would make the All-Star leap. This correlated with a serious breakout from a veteran point guard in his second year in Toronto, and his 8th overall in the NBA.
Nice feed, two-handed slam. 3 to tie. Lowry, half-court heave, a prayer at the buzzer. Oh!
Kyle Lowry was a late bloomer, likely because he was a journeyman for most of his career to this point. Kyle was a Swiss Army knife, a strong defender, playmaker, and shooter, in particular as a pull-up three-point shooter and especially out of the pick and roll. He was also basically the spirit of the Raptors for his entire tenure, so much so he became known as Mr. Raptor, an excellent teammate and leader. He technically wouldn't make the All-Star team in his first breakout season despite putting up similar numbers to his later All-Star years, but these two as a backcourt glowing up at the exact same time suddenly gave Toronto something to believe in.
So when I came, I just want to bring that feeling back when I used to watch Vince. I used to watch Vince, them early games back in LA, early in the morning, playing on the weekends, him scoring 50 on, ESPN, little things like that, and the excitement that everybody had for the Raptors.
They would make the playoffs for the first time in half a decade, facing the failed attempt at a super team in Brooklyn led by Paul Pierce, Joe Johnson, and Darren Williams. Brooke Lopez missed the series with an injury, and KG was washed and on the bench at this point, so it was a very winnable series, but Toronto's inexperience would show throughout, particularly for DeMar DeRozan, as in Game 7, DeMar went 5 for 12 with 18 points, getting outscored by his teammate and fellow Raptors legend Amir Johnson in just half of the playing time. In that game, though, Toronto had a shot to win it. Once again down 1, with just a few seconds remaining, the ball ended up in the hands of Mr. Raptor himself, and this happened.
Lowry, Williams the tight defense. Here is Lowry on the deck, through 2. Lowry put it up, it's blocked by Pierce, and the Nets win the series! As Paul Pierce waiting in front of the rim.
Toronto would lose by 1 point in a Game 7 yet again. Disappointment, underperformance, and underwhelming clutch time play would unfortunately become the staple of Toronto playoff basketball for the foreseeable future of the Lowry-DeRozan era. They would go on to be swept by the Washington Wizards in the following season, while DeMar shot 40% from the field and Lowry shot 31%. Not ideal. Kyle would make the All-NBA third team in the following year, entering the 20 points per game club, and as a result, Toronto won 56 games and had genuine championship aspirations. They would go much further than the first round this time, but they did so in a pretty ugly and, well, just downright pathetic way. First, they beat Paul George's Indiana Pacers after things had fallen apart. PG himself was great, but there was no reason for this to be a 7-game series. However, Lowry and DeRozan both shot 31% from the field for the entire series. Next, they were facing the Miami Heat, but again, as a shell of their former selves since LeBron had left 2 seasons ago, and it was just Wade and Bosh doing the best that they could. Yet again, a series that shouldn't have gone to 7 did exactly that. This time around, DeMar and Lowry didn't perform as pathetically, but they were still around 40% from the field for the whole series. So they limped their way to the conference finals, getting 2 cupcake matchups against formerly great teams, but they wouldn't get so lucky the 3rd time around. They would brush up with the devil himself. Or at least the devil if you're literally any Eastern Conference playoff team between the years 2011 and 2018, and especially if you're the Raptors. Luckily for Toronto, Kyle and DeMar finally stopped dragging their heels and showed up, resulting in a 6-game series when it would have been a sweep had the Cavs bothered to pick up the broom. But while I commend them, they were no match for the King on his most important mission.
Kyrie Irving with a steal. 3-on-1. Alley-oop to James. Tries to draw the offensive foul. Nice pass again, and Thompson the finish. James on the run. Dragged down, and he still gets it to go. Drag it down. James on the drive.
An Eastern Conference Finals appearance in year 2 of this star duo isn't anything to complain about, but given how poorly they played to get there, managing to fail upwards, and how clearly LeBron showed that there were levels to this, it still seemed like Toronto had a lot of growing up to do. In the following season, DeRozan would have his best year yet, averaging 27 points a game and making the All-NBA 3rd team, while Lowry was still an all-star, putting up career-high scoring numbers. But unfortunately, they would face Cleveland again, this time in round 2. DeMar underperformed in the series yet again, and LeBron averaged a casual 36. Not a recipe for success, to say the least.
Cavaliers trying to go up 3-0. LeBron James working against Ibaka, stares him down, and then in favor of the Cavaliers. Backing down, left hand. Wow, tough shot. Open shot. Scav. Oh, they double team, but it leads to this. Irving off the back. James fading. Another great shot. With Kobe Bryant.
Thus far, I've painted a cynical picture of this era of Raptors basketball, but there was a light at the end of the tunnel. After losing to the greatest team of all time in the 2017 finals, Kyrie Irving would ask out of Cleveland, and they would get back a broken Isaiah Thomas as well as Jay Crowder. Cleveland was now super vulnerable, and the Eastern Conference was seemingly wide open. Toronto took full advantage of this in the regular season, having their best year in franchise history, winning 59 games, playing a new brand of basketball that emphasized team play, going from 30th in the league in assists to 6th. This was due in large part to their assistant coach Nick Nurse making some major changes to the offense, even admitting that their goal was to create more assisted baskets. In a preseason article with The Athletic in 2017, where Eric Corrine writes, Nurse had been on the Raptors coaching staff since Masai Ujiri became the team president in 2013. Nurse was seen as an offensive expert, someone who would help the Raptors improve on that end, given their head coach Dwayne Casey having his tactical expertise lay on the defensive end of the floor. And speaking of defense, their new addition of Serge Ibaka also helped make them a top 5 defense for the first time in this era. They were riding high going into the postseason. They won in 6 versus Washington, despite John Wall and Bradley Beal both being on heaters, but then they had to walk into the belly of the beast yet again. But it's okay. Everything's okay. Sure, it's LeBron James, but his roster is awful. LeBron just had a nearly 35% usage rate in a grueling 7-game series. He only had one teammate average double-digit points, and that was Kevin Love, averaging 11 on 33% shooting. They are vulnerable. This is the time to take down the king. Yeah, no. Turns out, that light at the end of the tunnel I was talking about was a trap, giving Toronto a glimmer of hope just so that LeBron could crush their spirit one more time.
Shot clock for LeBron James.
Hold on.
We're speechless, Hubie Brown.
Backing down Lowry.
Heat check. Still sizzling.
LeBron fades away over Siakam. LeBron backing down DeRozan. There's that fadeaway, and it's Butter. Under 3 seconds to go. Throws up the floater. Good night.
Jesus Christ, man. Look, I don't know what LeBron has against Toronto. Maybe he hates the anthem. It's definitely kind of mid. Perhaps he's just watched too much South Park, you know, blame Canada and all that. Maybe he's against universal health care. I don't know. Either way, the Raptors were behind one of the most embarrassing playoff losses in the history of this league. LeBron averaged 34, 11, and 8 with 3 stocks, and it wasn't just that he did that, but how he did it. Toronto didn't do an awful job guarding the guy by any means. Their goal was to force LeBron to be a jump shooter, use their strong interior defense from Ibaka to keep him away from the rim, and if he beats you on middies, then so be it. Well, he beat them on middies. He couldn't fucking miss them. Toronto's historic season resulted in a devastating loss. Even though Kyle Lowry had a statistically strong series, DeMar DeRozan, on the other hand, averaged a measly 16.8 points, a 6.2 point per game drop-off from the regular season with an 8% dip in true shooting percentage. Now, on a positive note, after predictably losing to the Warriors in his 8th straight finals appearance, LeBron would move west to the LA Lakers, so he would no longer exist as an obstacle. But even if they did get past LeBron, their odds of beating Curry and KD's Warriors in the finals were virtually non-existent. And when it comes to Toronto's best scorer, DeMar DeRozan, he has proven to be pretty unreliable in the biggest moments. From 2013 to 2018, in the regular season, DeMar averaged 23.4 points on 54% true shooting. In the 51 playoff games he played for Toronto over that same span, he averaged 21.9 on 50% true shooting, with many of his biggest underperformances coming in elimination games. Toronto's team president, Masai Ujiri, made the decision to trade D. Rose while Kyle Lowry and company stuck around. And that is how Toronto ended up primed to trade for a disgruntled superstar. Kawhi has found himself in a precarious narrative situation yet again. He's just made a big mess in San Antonio, justified or not. He's also just joined a team that everybody knows isn't one of his preferred destinations of LA and LA. Not to mention, of course, his injury concerns that might throw a wrench into this whole equation at any point. Luckily for Kawhi Leonard, he was joining a pretty fucking excellent team.
Magruder denying Siakam. Kyle. T.
Obviously, I've introduced you to Kyle Lowry already, but he adjusted his game this season, reducing his scoring volume as it became less necessary in the context of this team, focusing more on his playmaking, averaging 1.8 more assists per game. With his help, the Raptors remained one of the best passing teams in the league. One of his favorite targets for his dimes was a former late first-round pick in his 3rd year, a Cameroonian forward who was having a breakout season.
Possessions out. You see Tobias Harris starting off on.
Pascal Siakam is an essential piece in all of this. Beyond the gamble of trading for Kawhi, Toronto had also gambled on their young players developing into genuine rotation pieces. Young players who had shown upside, but were by no means sure things. Siakam would more than prove his viability, not just as a rotation piece, but as the second scoring option on the team, averaging 17 points per game, a 10-point per game leap from the previous season, which resulted in him running away with the Most Improved Player award. As a scorer, Siakam was both an excellent rim runner without the ball and an excellent slasher with it. His jump shot was inconsistent, but worthy of the defense's respect, and while he wasn't an extraordinary passer, you would seldom find him failing to make the right play. These three were the primary driving forces of Toronto's offense, and paired with them in the starting lineup would be two excellent floor spacers and defenders.
Danny Green for three. Bang! In the paint. Crowded. Gasol to tie it, and he does!
Danny Green came along with Kawhi in the trade, and while you can't say he did anything like that exceptional, the fact is every NBA team needs someone like Danny Green. He played excellent defense, and while his jumper could be inconsistent, his reputation still made him an effective spacer. The other defensive-minded floor spacer also came by trade, but it was actually mid-season. Marc Gasol, a former Defensive Player of the Year, was acquired from the Memphis Grizzlies near the trade deadline. But this was only possible because of a last-second decision by a third team. See, Mark had just came into his own as a three-point shooter, as this was the brief part of a three-point revolution where centers with a soft touch started trying their luck from three more often. But this was too little too late for Memphis, as the grit and grind era had all but officially come to an end. So the Grizzlies finally pulled the plug on their 2019 season and decided to get some assets for one of their aging all-time greats. A deal was reportedly complete between the Charlotte Hornets and Memphis Grizzlies, but Charlotte backed out because Gasol apparently refused to commit to them beyond the remainder of the season. So at the buzzer, Gasol was sent to Toronto on February 7th, 2019 for Jonas Valanciunas, DeLon Wright, CJ Miles, and a 2024 second-round pick. Jonas Valanciunas was a solid starting center, but not really what Toronto needed, with Pascal breaking out as an interior scorer at the power forward spot. A five who could space the floor would be more optimal. In the 30 games Siakam played with Valanciunas that year, he averaged 14.5 points per game. In the 26 he played with Mark, he averaged 20.1. This would play a large part in Siakam averaging 19 points per game throughout that year's playoffs. But on top of floor spacing, Gasol, while not quite at the 2013 DPOY levels of his prime, was still a phenomenal defender. He used his size well and was exceptionally smart when it came to his positioning and communication. And on top of that, he was an excellent passer for a five, averaging 3.9 assists per game. That was an underrated aspect of this team. Lowry, Kawhi, Siakam, and Gasol were all good to great passers, resulting in the Raptors consistently getting a good shot. Not to mention that they had another great playmaker coming off of the bench at the point guard position. Fred was another one of those young guys that the Raptors had gambled on. In his second season in 2018, Fred actually miraculously ended up third in a two-man, six-man of the year race. I say miraculously because his numbers are substantially worse than players who received less votes, and the six-man of the year award is typically nothing if not a points per game contest. Either way, he looked good off of the bench, especially as a shooter, hitting 41.4% of his 3.5 attempts from three a night. Fred proved to be worth the gamble, like Siakam, averaging 11 points and 5 assists while remaining a great three-point shooter in 27 minutes of action a game. Fred wasn't always the first man off of the bench though. Sometimes it would be their defensive phenom with a silky smooth mid-range jumper who could play the 4 or the 5. The one and only Serge Ibaka.
Puts a shot up, his own rebound. Ibaka for the lead. Good! Serge Ibaka.
I mentioned Mr. Ibaka already, but his value to these Raptors is often overlooked. Like Gasol, he wasn't quite his peak self on this team, especially when it comes to the eye-popping block numbers, but he remained one of the best defenders in the league, still being a good rim protector and providing a ton of versatility with his ability to play the 4 on both ends, moving his feet well on defense and pairing well next to Marc Gasol since Marc had a 3-point shot. With his ability to play the 4, Siakam's ability to play the 3, and Kawhi's ability to run the 2, Toronto would be able to run lineups with a terrifying amount of length and versatility on the defensive end. And considering that Lowry and Fred were no slouches on D despite being undersized, and Danny Green was also a terrific defender, any combination of players Toronto would put on the floor was going to be an elite defensive unit no matter what. To top everything else off, there was also a head coaching change. Though this one is a bit controversial because Toronto's aforementioned assistant coach Nick Nurse would be replacing Dwayne Casey, who was fired despite winning Coach of the Year. In fact, because of the now defunct NBA awards show that happened after the postseason, Casey received his Coach of the Year award after being fired. Ouch. Well, I don't think this firing was necessary for their success. At the very least, Nick Nurse was a damn good head coach in his own right, actually winning Coach of the Year himself in just his second year with Toronto. This time, they didn't fire him afterwards, or at least not immediately. They did 3 seasons later. Anyways, this is your 2019 Toronto Raptors squad, stacked top to bottom with elite defenders, decision makers, and shooters, all led by our protagonist Kawhi Leonard. He had all the pieces around him necessary to go on a revenge tour. That is, so long as his body would allow it. Going into the 2018-19 regular season, the Toronto Raptors were given the 5th best odds at winning a championship. The best odds that they had ever been given, but still considered worse than the Celtics, who had just fallen a game short of a finals appearance without their best player Kyrie Irving, and not even favored over LeBron James in LA pre-Anthony Davis. They were by no means expected to run through the league. Toronto would end up as the 2nd seed in the East, winning 58 games. Kawhi would average a casual 26-7 during the regular season, but of course, we wouldn't be talking about this team if it weren't for the playoffs, so let's get to those. In round 1, they would face the Magic. DJ Augustine would hit a game winner in game 1 and then get swept in the remaining games. Not much of interest to report here, so we're going to quickly move on. But don't worry, things are heating up in round 2. See, with the East this year being perceived as fairly wide open, there were a handful of teams ready to go all in.
Breaking news, wow. Jimmy Butler has been traded to the Philadelphia 76ers.
The Clippers and the Sixers agreed to a deal that will send Tobias Harris to Philly.
The Sixers were already a big enough threat with the foundation of Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, which had just won 52 games in the season prior. But now, being added to that was a disgruntled Jimmy Butler from the Minnesota Timberwolves, arguably a top 10 player in the league, an excellent shot creator inside the arc, and a dog on the defensive end, and as a leader, which wasn't always a good thing for Philly, but that's a story for another day. On top of that, Tobias Harris was the best scorer on a Clippers team that refused to be bad despite losing the key pieces from the Lob City era. He ended up in Philly, finally giving the Clippers a chance to properly tank, but they still persisted and narrowly made the 8th seed without him. And as a floor-spacing shot-creating 4, he made for a perfect 4th option on offense. But honestly, what order the options were depended entirely on what game it was, because with JJ Redick as their perfect 5th starter, the Sixers' scoring was distributed insanely well among their starters. Joel obviously led with 27 points per game, but Ben, Jimmy, JJ, and Harris all averaged 17 to 18 points per game. These 76ers would make for an extremely formidable opponent for Toronto in round 2. Kawhi had a 45-point Game 1 performance that would put the Raptors on top to start the series.
Marjanovic ranged over, but it's one-on-one. It's a fade, and he makes it look so easy.
Leonard
Gets inside, and it's just effortless right now. Leonard squares.
But Philly would get a huge win in Game 2, stealing home court from the Raptors. This despite a 2-for-7 performance from Joel Embiid, thanks to a 30-piece from Jimmy Butler, including 7 points in a tight final 3 minutes.
Butler, that goes. The defenders finds Butler. Oh, Jimmy Butler, bullseye.
Game 3 would also go to Philly, this time led by an Embiid 30-piece.
Embiid for 3. Embiid fakes, Embiid down the lane.
But Toronto would render the Sixers stealing home court irrelevant by tying it up in Philadelphia, this thanks to a 39-point, 15-rebound performance from Kawhi on an astonishing 77% true shooting.
See, they'll run it. Switches, fires a long one. Oh, nothing but net.
Joel Embiid also kind of shit the bed again. Game 5 is said to be the most important, as if a series is tied up, the team that wins Game 5 has 1 game of room for error. The loser of Game 5 has to be perfect to come out on top. Toronto made sure to gain this room for error because holy shit did they beat the crap out of Philly in Game 5, posting a final score of 125-89. Yeesh.
Ibaka, the fake, and the Statue of Liberty dunk. Lowry, chance it. Leonard makes his move. Just 1 point off the halftime lead.
Kawhi was fantastic, but in no way did he carry his team this time. This was a team effort with a fairly even scoring distribution, as all 5 starters scored in double digits and worked tirelessly to eat up every bit of space on the defensive end. It was a good thing they gained that margin of error though, because Philly managed to hang on in Game 6, with this also coming mostly from a team effort, but also Ben Simmons had his only remotely good game in the series.
Hangs, can't finish. Oh, Simmons! TNT will have that. Here's Butler, alley-oop, and Simmons with the putdown.
Now, we moved through those games fairly quickly, because for the most part, while the series was close, the games themselves were not. Luckily, both of these teams gave us the blessing of saving the best game of the series for last. Game 7 was an old-school, grinded-out dogfight. Neither team's star-level players shot the ball efficiently. Kawhi Leonard would finish the game with 41 points, but it took 39 shots and 8 free throw attempts to get there. And to make matters worse, his teammates couldn't hit a shot. Every starter shot in the 30s percentage-wise. Fred VanVleet would even go 0 for 5. Serge Ibaka was the only player who had an even average efficiency, scoring 17 points on 6 for 10 shooting, also hitting 3 threes. Going into the fourth quarter, Toronto was up 3 at 67-64. Ibaka started the quarter off with a tough corner 3 that really had no business going in. Then Kawhi and Jimmy Butler traded a few buckets. Philly wasn't exactly shooting the ball super well either, and Jimmy for the game shot it poorly, but he and Kawhi both had no issue hitting their shots in the fourth. Jimmy went 3 for 5 with 10 points, and Kawhi scored 15 on a scorching 6 for 9 shooting. He was locked in for crunch time. Toronto had briefly lost the lead, but Kyle Lowry took it back with this difficult shot to beat the buzzer. With Ibaka having the hot hand, Nick Nurse opted to close the game with him at the 4, Kawhi at the 2, and Siakam at the 3. The ability to run a lineup like that is what made Toronto so deadly. The defense was suffocating, and on offense, because Ibaka was hitting his threes and Kawhi was an unstoppable one-on-one force, they got by despite some sometimes awkward spacing. Kawhi would continue to hit difficult shot after difficult shot. With 3.5 minutes to go, JJ Redick hit an and-one mid-range with the extra point. That tied it up at 85 points apiece. After a 2-minute scoring drought from both teams, Kawhi hit a long 2-pointer off of a Siakam screen. Embiid wasn't in drop coverage, but he started to backpedal, anticipating the drive. Following this possession, Toronto locked up for a full 23 seconds just to get a steal in the final second. This put Toronto up 4 with just under a minute remaining. Philly would proceed to draw 2 fouls, with Butler splitting a pair and Embiid making both, making it a 1-point game with 12 seconds on the clock. They would foul Kawhi on the inbound, but he would miss his second free throw, and the Raptors would fail to get set in transition. Toronto calls timeout, and they have 4.2 seconds remaining to get a shot off to avoid overtime. I mean, you already know what happens, but I'm going to play it anyways.
Off to Leonard, defended by Simmons. Is this the dagger? Game! Series! Toronto has won!
Kawhi Leonard hits what would be the most iconic shot in his career, in the history of Toronto basketball, and just outright one of the most iconic shots in the history of basketball, period. The first, and to this point, only game-winning buzzer beater in a Game 7. That shot gave Kawhi 41 on the game, with him finishing the series averaging just under 35 points per game, as well as a series-high 10 rebounds. With that, Toronto was advancing, and the team that they would meet in the conference finals, oddly enough, looked a lot like the team that the 2001 Raptors failed to meet. These Milwaukee Bucks were even led by a guy wearing the same number. The Bucks had signed Brook Lopez in the offseason, which elevated Giannis to his first MVP award, and the Bucks to a 60-win record. A small but devastatingly effective addition really unlocked how this team played and brought them from a fun, pretty good playoff team to a legit contender led by first-time MVP Giannis Antetokounmpo. There was one key difference, though, between this team and the roster that would go on to eventually win a title 2 seasons later, and that difference was the point guard position. Eric Bledsoe was a really strong slasher and defender, a pretty good playmaker as well. He even earned the nickname Mini LeBron somehow, but unfortunately, his jumper was pretty god-awful. This created a huge advantage for Toronto, who could sag off of Bledsoe and load up on Giannis, putting a ton of pressure on him on ball and presenting a backline of defense that would make getting to the rim very difficult. This defensive scheme was called the Wall. Kawhi or Siakam would take on the initial matchup versus Giannis, while Gasol or Ibaka would wait in the paint, ready to help when necessary. Giannis could kick it out to his teammates to punish the defense for giving him so much attention, but then those teammates wouldn't hit their shots. Eric Bledsoe shot 17% from outside, and worse yet, Lopez shot 31%, and Chris Middleton, while he did hit his threes, was overall struggling to score the ball. So Giannis was forced to either drive into a ton of traffic or pass out to teammates who were probably going to miss the shot. It was a no-win scenario for Milwaukee. As a credit to his greatness, Giannis still pushed this thing to 6, despite the nightmare matchup, and the Raptors would end up playing a large part in his development as a player, and how badly Eric Bledsoe got exposed was also instrumental in the Bucks eventually acquiring Drew Holiday down the line. I kind of feel like the 2019 Raptors, in a smaller subtext, were essentially like the bad boy Pistons to Giannis's Michael Jordan. Anyways, the series was tied up after 4, with Toronto winning Game 4 off of an absolute heater from Fred VanVleet, who had just become a father. The next 2 games in the series would be won on excellent clutch execution from the Raptors and continued hot shooting from Father Fred. In Game 5, Fred hit 7 3-pointers, and in the 4th, they outscored Milwaukee 33-24, and in Game 6, Fred had 14 on 4 of 5 shooting from 3, and in the 4th, Toronto outscored the Bucks 29-18. Milwaukee just wasn't ready.
The Raptors were just 2 games behind the Milwaukee Bucks in the regular season. They're off the bench to celebrate.
I want to take now to point out how much the Raptors fan base brought to the table for this championship. Looking for clips for this video, there were multiple instances where Toronto's crowd was so damn loud that you couldn't even hear what the announcers were saying. You could really feel how much this meant to them as this run was happening. Waiting for the Raptors in the finals were the Golden State Warriors. Kawhi was once again facing the team that put him on this path to Toronto to begin with. This time, they wouldn't get off so easy. Round 1 versus the Clippers went to 6, which is 2 games more than it should have been. Then in round 2 versus Houston, Kevin Durant would go down with an injury that would sideline him for the remainder of the Western Conference playoffs and would make him questionable to appear in the finals. The Dubs managed to still make it out of the West without too much struggle, this primarily because Steph Curry was their best player. But it would be pretty difficult to beat Toronto without Durant, as they had sacrificed their depth to add him to the roster, so while they still had their original big three, they weren't super well equipped. A lot of people hold this against the Raptors, and sure, if I were a betting man and KD had played this whole series, my money would have been on Golden State, and I probably wouldn't have won a lot, but I don't think it was a guaranteed outcome by any means. Remember how well Kawhi played the Warriors when they were at their absolute best in 2017? Well, now consider how much better of a roster Toronto was, especially how well they'd match up defensively. While I think Golden State would have won, this team would have been the biggest challenge the KD Warriors would ever face. With all of that said, how did they play the team in front of them? The Raptors won Game 1 on their home floor despite Curry and Klay combining for 55 and Draymond Green getting the most bare minimum triple-double possible. Kawhi actually struggled offensively, but Siakam had an outstanding shooting night, going 14 for 17 from the field. Marc Gasol also had a 20-piece, and Fred VanVleet continued his hot shooting. Golden State managed to win Game 2 off of their defense, as basically everybody struggled for both teams in this game. They won narrowly 109-104. Klay and Draymond both had really strong games, but unfortunately Klay's game would end on a sour note.
Trying to draw a foul here, spreads his legs and lands awkwardly, and progressively looks like it just starts to bother him more and more until finally on that last possession he's calling for a foul.
With Klay now out of the picture, Toronto really had a wide open pathway towards their first title, as they had pretty much nobody else to worry about on the offensive end. The Raptors decided to take full advantage of this by running a box and one on Stephen Curry in Game 3, a defensive strategy that combines man and zone defense. The focal point of the offense gets the one-on-one matchup, while the other 4 players form a zone in a box shape. Now, how did this strategy work out for Toronto? Well,
in the playoffs, they're 5-1. Curry for 3. Curry, foul line jumper. Curry shake and bake, 3-pointer. It goes! Steph Curry with a bounce.
Yeah, Steph ended up doing plenty of damage regardless of occupying all of the attention from one of the best defensive teams in NBA history. That didn't change the outcome in the win-loss column, though. Curry had 47 on 63% true shooting, but the Warriors outside of him had just 62 points and had just a 46% true shooting percentage. Just not enough when Toronto's starting lineup alone combined for 106 points with some insane scoring distribution. There was hope on the horizon for Golden State in Game 4, however, because Klay Thompson was back, so the defense could no longer focus exclusively on Curry. And he came back like he hadn't skipped a beat, scoring 28 on 78% true shooting. But once again, there just wasn't much offensive support besides for their backcourt. Curry and Klay had combined for 55 points again, but the rest of the team scored just 37. Meanwhile, Kawhi had a 36-piece and Serge Ibaka scored 20 in 21 minutes off of the bench. So Golden State had gone down 3-1 in the finals. But hey, perhaps this is an opportunity to make up for their past blunder. Maybe they could be the next team to come back from 3-1 And it seemed as though that was a genuine possibility because despite not really being ready yet, Golden State was putting Kevin Durant back in the action. And at first, it looked like Toronto might have good reason to be scared.
Curry to Durant. Here's his first shot. And it looks pretty good there without 6 to 3. Durant for 3. Kevin Durant, his third three-pointer already.
Just like that, Durant had scored 11 points in 11 minutes, putting Golden State up 6 after the first quarter. But then, this happened.
Walker trying to stay with Durant, knocks it away, and Durant slipping. Durant goes down holding his leg.
Yeah, Durant's already bad injury just got a whole lot worse. Unfortunately, this was an Achilles tear that would sideline him for a year. Still, Durant did give them somewhat of a lead, and Golden State still managed to be just good enough to maintain that lead. Toronto took said lead back, being up 3 with a minute and a half remaining, but then the Splash Brothers would happen.
Curry gets a look, fires away, ties the game! Back out to Green, Thompson, one fake, one dribble, one shot, got it! Golden State retakes the lead!
The Raptors would get a chance to win it at the buzzer, but Draymond Green had different plans.
6 seconds remaining. Leonard, back up Van Fleet. Van Fleet kicks it out Lowry. Lowry for the win, won't go! And there'll be a Game 6 in Oakland.
Game 6 was also fairly close. Steph struggled shooting the ball, but Klay had an efficient 30, and Draymond had a monster stat line of 11 points, 13 assists, 19 rebounds, and 5 stocks. Andre Iguodala also stepped up big time, scoring 22 points, the most points he had in a playoff game since round 1 versus the Rockets in 2016. This was another game where Kawhi kinda struggled to shoot the ball, but Siakam and Lowry were able to step up to mitigate that, both scoring 26. Meanwhile, Father Fred had 22 points, meaning since Game 4 versus the Bucks onward, he had averaged 14.7 points a night. Fatherhood really does change you, I guess. It was looking like Golden State might actually push this thing to 7, as the Warriors had a heater of a third quarter, with Klay Thompson scoring 12 on 4 of 5 shooting. Unfortunately, 2 of those points came at the free throw line after this happened.
Thompson running the floor, and a foul. And Thompson grabs his left knee, now writhing in pain. Steph Curry slamming the ball on the court, so upset.
Yeah, that right there pretty much sealed the series, as once again Steph was stranded as the lone scoring option, and they were able to hold him to 1 of 6 shooting in the fourth quarter, winning the quarter by 6 and the game by 4. Maybe not the most storybook final series in the world, definitely not what you'd want it to be in an ideal world, but hey, you can only play who's in front of you. And regardless of how you view these injuries and their effect on the series, the end result is all the same.
Now the Warriors just inbound, and that's it. There's the new NBA champion, and it's a team from Toronto, Canada. We, the North, are now we, the champions, the Raptors, the 2019 NBA champs.
73 years after the Huskies wrote the city of Toronto into NBA history, Toronto themselves would hoist the Larry O'Brien Trophy. Something that honestly seemed like it might never happen. The Raptors were absolutely the type of NBA franchise that just doesn't win a title. But thanks to a massive gamble by Masai Ujiri and a whole bunch of pieces falling perfectly into place, the franchise earned its first and currently only title. And as for our main character,
I just want to say thank y'all for welcoming me here after the trade with open arms, man. It made my experience that much better. This group of guys let me do what I do on the floor. Coach Nick let me do what I do. And now we got a championship.
he had proven definitively that he was capable of leading a championship team on his own. Separate from the influence of Pop, he was his own man. He was a superstar and a champion, and nobody could take that from him. For the playoffs as a whole, he averaged 30.5 points, which is the 11th highest anyone has ever averaged on a title run, and the 5th highest by someone not named Michael Jordan. So for all intents and purposes, Kawhi essentially had a Jordan-esque championship run. One of the greatest seasons any NBA player has ever had, and he did it in fucking Toronto, a team that he had no interest in playing for. And yet, despite that looming over them all season, Kawhi and his excellent supporting cast executed time and time again on their way to a championship parade at Nathan Phillips Square. And for a moment, it seemed as though that there was nothing to do but celebrate. But people had been speculating since the day he was traded that there was almost no chance that the Raptors would be able to re-sign him. That even if they somehow won a championship over the Warriors, the Claw would leave the harsh Canadian winters for the comforts of home in California. And doubts that he'd resign may have only subsided during these 4 seconds. The team was poised to contend for titles for years to come, and the city was embracing him about as much as they had ever embraced anyone. So it stood to reason that if Kawhi were to stay in Toronto, then this championship with the added potential for a dynasty run would override his previous ambitions. Right? Right?
Don't let me leave, Murph. Don't let me leave, Murph.
I just want to take a second to point out how improbable all of this was. There's so many different things that could have gone wrong that it's only worth the gamble if you've got nothing left. Honestly, LeBron did Toronto a favor by beating their ass to the degree that he did in 2018. As weird as that is to say, even after pulling off the trade of the summer, barely managing to add Marc Gasol because the Hornets got cold feet was unlikely, and yet it happened. Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet both needed to come into this season much better than they were before, and despite that also being unlikely, Pascal did it so well he won Most Improved Player and averaged 19 points per game in the playoffs, while Fred ended up being the most impactful sixth man of the playoffs, straight up winning them a handful of key games, which seemed like the epitome of unlikely. Then, of course, on the less positive side, Golden State had a series of injuries that definitely made things easier. While injuries shaping playoff series isn't all of that out of the ordinary in general, the magnitude of the injuries the Warriors suffered was by no means business as usual. Add to it that this is the Toronto Raptors that we're talking about. Don't get me wrong, the Raptors are a surprisingly competent franchise historically. They've made the playoffs 13 times in 29 seasons, despite their stretch of missing them with Vince and their early expansion era growing pains. It's not great, but it ain't bad. However, like I said, the Raptors were definitely the type of franchise that just doesn't win a championship in the NBA. There are plenty of franchises that will remain without one because they won't ever be hit with the trifecta of competent management, a home run trade opportunity, and extraordinary luck in player development, coaching, and even injuries for both their roster and their opponents. By all conventional sensibilities around what's supposed to happen in the NBA, these Raptors should have never won a championship, and yet they did anyways. We as NBA fans love to talk about what ifs, and I feel like often the what if is what we think should have happened, like what in our head makes more sense than reality. But this run was one of those moments in NBA history where the chaos proved to be one of the league's strongest attributes. Because, like, what is this story? The way Kawhi got there was insane. The set of circumstances required for his relationship with the Spurs to have gone the way that it did when it did is insane. Then you factor in LeBron's historic dominance against the Raptors being so significant that it overrode the dramatic difference in roster and coaching quality. Like, if LeBron won that series in 6 or 7 instead of sweeping them, I don't know if Masai pulls the trigger on that deal given the unknown that Kawhi was with his injury history and impending free agency. But clearly it's a good thing he did, because it was one of the dominoes in a series of unlikely events that resulted in a title run, the likes of which we will probably never see ever again. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, I cannot thank you enough for that. If you want to show support beyond that, dropping a like would be great. Subscribing if you want to see more would be great, especially because we have a part 2 coming. But again, if you're even listening to me yap this far in, you're the fucking GOAT. With that said, there are going to be a couple of changes for this channel going into the future, going into 2025. We plan on changing the channel name. We're probably going to be putting a lot of the old content that doesn't really jive with our current style unlisted into a separate playlist. And we're also going to be doing more stuff involving our Patreon, both for this channel and for our second channel, also Rusty Buckets, if you weren't aware of that already. So click that link to join if you want to join a Discord, get content early, and even participate in some ways in the creation of the content. That would be much appreciated. And yeah, make sure you're here for part 2, where we talk about the disaster that has been the Kawhi Leonard era on the Clippers. If you don't want to go to a third-party site, you can also join as a channel member and get access to much of the same content. It's not as good, but it is also an option for you.